which is maybe the weird part. I do actually think that that's more important than personal style. This is I might lose somebody in the sense that we do perhaps have a responsibility towards these objects and the life world that they were embedded in, that we can recall, appropriate, and work through by wearing them. This sounds a bit esoteric, but I'm going for this in the sense that rather than me as an individual subjectively crafting a unique style that I then display to the delight of others on social media, which maybe is what I'm doing. What I'm actually doing is working through clothing sartorial history in a very conscious manner in order to get a feeling for like to use a metaphor, like the seams of history that can be approached in this way. To me, is a meaningful pursuit. And I am like a historian of thinking and writing. That is my job. And there has been a slight convergence there. Like the way you read an older novel or an older philosophical text, and you could sort of see and feel in a very deep way how this relates to you, not in the sense of how it sort of equips you to do anything in particular, but that allows you to orient yourself, thinking, speaking as a dressed being in the world, if you could put it that way.
I like that.
It's a weird way.
Being.
Yeah, dressed being in the world. That's why I do think so, that there is an approach to style that isn't appropriating it for your own subjective good, but you are not responsible, sort of responsive to a history and a life world that precedes you and that you can communicate with in that way. And that is different from a blind obedience to tradition, because that is a reactualization of what the potentials of each and every garment. You don't wear an Ivy style 3-2 jacket in order to assimilate yourself to the atmosphere of Brown University circa 1963 or whatever. That's weird. That is costume play in a sense. I don't have that drive. I'm not a true nostalgic in this way. What I believe in is that you can have access to these sort of historical dimensions of the present through these particular objects, their garments, and how they relate to things. And no different for me that, in a sense, different only in intensity. Like a work of art has a greater scope than a shirt or a jacket, even though how great it may well be. But it's still a repository of possibilities of relating to the world, no matter how you look at it. And entering into that is important. And doing it also with the knowledge and the foresight that we are about to lose these things unless we are able to revitalize it in some way. But in a sense, not about to lose. We have, in fact, I think, lost it already. The classic menswear, in a sense, is gone or a dying period. But what we can do is have keep it alive, or keep it alive, keep that space open, so that it's not lost, at least as a possibility, as possible relation. And that is a philosophical, somewhat esoteric view, but that is the point that I'm at right now.
That's completely fascinating. I think you may have just entirely revolutionized the way that I look at dressing. So with that said, with that philosophical approach to dressing, how is it that you go about determining what it is that you're going to wear on a day-to-day basis?
No, that is sort of, I don't have a methodical approach. Often it's simply based on something that I would like to wear and explore a bit further. And then I just sort of take it from take it from there. I do try to introduce a couple of elements that make things more difficult or more interesting. I try, for instance, not to repeat things. Like once an ensemble is done, I tend to be done with it for forever, which is a bit odd, but not because I think it's bad to repeat anything. On the contrary, but because I find that it just adds an extra degree of difficulty to things that can make it more interesting that way. We can put an external restraint on something. But I don't know. I think I'm in a moment now where because since I stayed outside of the classroom teaching online and so on for over a year, pretty much. And it's only this fall that I returned to the classroom and sort of clothing became more sort of bound by the social and institutional situations. So it's just, I guess, a period of not rediscovery, but trying to have a sort of more of a clear relationship to where I want things to be. It always has to be better than last year. I look at some of the stuff that I came up with last year and say, okay, there's definitely still development going on here. So we'll see what might happen. I'm not immune to change in no way. So I'm still not done. I wonder if I will be done at some point.
Yeah, that's the next question I was going to ask, like whether you're ever going to develop a style, if you know what I mean, like in some sort of rigid sense where you have like, this is me, this is the kind of thing that I wear, or if it's just going to be a continual, transcending.
I think I'm closer. Like, for instance, I travel a lot. I would still like to do some more, but I think I do travel in order to be done with it at some point. Like I do it in order to stop. There is this idea that you expose yourself to a lot of things. The younger you are, the greater your level of exposure is, and then when you get a little bit older, things do get a little bit narrower but more precise. And that is true in terms of my own. I see it in other dimensions, like in terms of other cultural products I consume, things I watch. I become more sort of careful of my time. I am not sort of I'm much less promiscuous with my time than before what I used to be. I'm no longer like an cultural omnivore in any sort of real sense. I'm able to leave things at the side, and I focus to rereading or rewatching certain things that are much more, that I have a more meaningful connection with, while keeping one eye on current development. So I expect something similar to happen in clothes, that I will be done at some point, because I don't particularly enjoy the sheer accumulation, and the newness of things is not something that I've ever been particularly fond of. I do expect that I do purchase clothes because one day I will be done. That this has like an expiration. This project that I've been on more or less for 3 or 4 years in terms of exploring the possibilities of the way I want to dress and so on. I think it has maybe a couple of more years in it, but in terms of newer acquisitions or trying out different things, I don't think it has that much more in it. At a certain point, you want to, I think that's good, to the way people say some filmmakers keep making the same things all over and over again. I think that's a good place to be. It's not a criticism of Scorsese or someone like that. Yeah, you don't have to do at one point it would be nice to be done.
So at some point you'll have like a wardrobe. Yeah,
or a wardrobe, or at least a point of view that will no longer be susceptible to change. It will just be, I will acquire a couple of these things. And for me, that's always been like, it's not a list exactly, but a few sort of American classics that have been acquired in a double sense. Ones that I've purchased them and found them, but also in the sense of I found a way for the way I think about clothes to include like a perfecto jacket or something, which was a couple of things that are a bit of a stretch, a couple of things that I've not yet been able to do as well as I want to. But at a certain point, I do expect that to stop, but I'm not quite there yet. We'll see.
So it's starting to get a little bit late. So I think we should probably. Oh, there we go. We got the light.
We got the light back.
One thing that I wanted to get your perspective on before we do leave is where you think menswear is going to be headed in the next 5 years. Do you have any sense of where it's headed at all?
I mean, they're going to be this sort of, in terms of where things are produced, like the type of shift is going to change. And it's going to be the pressure on sort of classic European manufacture is going to be increased. I don't see that relenting in any way. I don't really see that there will be a credible counter movement to fast fashion in the way. It'll just be a further segmentation. I do not think that that will happen, but I will see, like, I think just the continued convergence of things like you already see with those collaborations that you mentioned, where very casual, outdoorsy, and athleisure will spill into. You see, like it's like Aimé Leon Dore are moving from sweatshirts into making suits, and then you see J. Press or Brooks Brothers moving the other way, and you see that's sort of making tailored clothing will sort of merge with the production of sweatpants, whatever, that they will be actually this very same makers making all of it. So no one will actually stand out or have like a recalcitrant view like that. That's not a prediction, that's already happening. I just see that will be much more pervasive. There's one thing that perhaps we haven't talked about, which is basically where things are going sort of cost-wise, because menswear is becoming inaccessible. This is like a bit like living in New York, like the rent's going up. Like, and that is a worry for me. It's harder and more expensive to get into these things than even a couple of years ago. I just noticed that a pair of like Crockett & Jones loafers that I bought like last year for, they were not cheap, but they went on sale like 30% off, and still more expensive than when I bought them full price last year. So I think what I'm worried about is something that I've seen in food, and particularly in wine, which is another passion of mine. I haven't really let into, but wine, you have seen that a few very coveted things have basically moved out of the realm of possibility. It was not that long ago, like stuff like fine Burgundy or Bordeaux wine was expensive, but it was, for someone with a normal paying job, it was a possible splurge for a special occasion. You could buy it in a wine store for, less than $100. You could buy like a top of the line, the very best. Those wines now cost thousands. That's not it. They've appreciated more than any crypto or any art or any artwork. All of these things. Namely, that is what perhaps I should hammer through for you. Basically, the becoming assets, the assetification of the entire economy, everything becoming assets in this way, like what has happened to luxury goods in wine, less so in food, but in wine definitely. And that is happening to menswear as well. So a few things will just move out of the realm of possibility, like Alden loafers. Prices are probably going to go up 40 to 50% in the next year, I've heard. That takes that out of the realm of possibility for me, of purchasing them new at least. And I expect that to continue. That's a sad way, basically, that a lot of the best things, the fine things in life, as has happened with wine, will move out, will no longer be accessible. And the prices for their replacement will also go up inexorably.
I was going to say, do you think that that's actually sustainable? I mean, if you move a product like that to a high enough price, you're going to get rid of your base. Do you think that there's going to be a point where it's going to kind of level off?
Well, it is a bubble in a sense, and in wine there has been a little bit, but there has if the asset economy has proved one thing, is that these bubbles are fine. Like, we are perfectly fine, like Wile E. Coyote just walking off the cliff, and just as long as we don't look down, it seems to be working just fine. So a lot of people will be, there are plenty of tailors who are making in Italy or something, making great, making good money on some of these things, but things will become terribly expensive. Yeah? I mean, that will probably be the biggest change in terms of the greater threat to menswear, as a style that has a broad base, is the same thing that keeps people from becoming homeowners, basically, that they become investment pieces or assets. You're seeing it more very clear in like the vintage market, where things have changed. You probably agree, is things that were affordable-ish just last year have now become extremely expensive. And that is not, that's the same thing that's happening to houses that are falling down in a Midwestern city, still being incredibly expensive. There are pockets where where things are still affordable, I guess, and things will move around a little bit, but that is unfortunately what's happening. That whenever something becomes or enters into this orbit of asset inflation, there is really no turning back, it seems, until the entire economy sort of has that adjustment, which, depending on who you listen to, might well happen. But that doesn't seem to be true. You would like to think that there's a limit there, that you will lose customer, but that doesn't seem to be the case at all. And I've seen, like, personally, my own spending habits have, like, it was unheard of for me to buy a vintage item for well over $100. That was not something that I would have done maybe even last year or a year and a half ago, but that does seem to happen now.
So do you see generally menswear becoming, because of this aesthetification, as you mentioned, do you see menswear becoming even more rare, or classic menswear rather, becoming more and more rare?
I think so, yeah. I think that that at least classic pieces will, along with vintage, will basically move up several brackets, and people who, we're seeing some versions of this too, where wealthier people now buy vintage clothing and use them as investment pieces and so on. I have friends, who do that, and that has become a very common occurrence. It's good for vintage dealers, at least for now, but for menswear as a whole, it's difficult to make that argument where at least younger people get left behind, exactly like the housing markets. And the question is, are there new areas of discovery that haven't been drawn into this yet? Vintage too is limited in supply. We're already like Y2K style is back in the vintage circus, but after that, you double back into fast fashion anyway. So fast fashion will not be revived by vintage style, I think, because I don't see that happening. So we are locked in basically a downward or sort of a zero-sum game there, I think.
It was almost ironic. It seems like we're going to be back at a place, if, assuming that things continue as you are suggesting, we're going to be back at a place that we started from, which is where menswear was for the elite.
That's exactly right. And we'll see this in all aspects of our culture, I think. We already see it in education, where the transformations of higher education, the student loan calamities and all that is conspiring to move what we consider a classical college education that involves, at least to some degree, studies in the humanities, is basically being withdrawn from people without their means. So the children of the wealthy will keep going to the liberal arts schools and do the classical curriculums, while the very same people who send their kids to liberal arts schools will tell everyone else who comes from a less advantaged background to go to a trade school or to get something very practical. That is unfortunately the way the entire culture is built, absent some kind of radical transformation, which is not in the cards, although some murmurs maybe. But there is no way that the way we dress can isolate itself from that larger social economic moment that we find ourselves in. And the defining moments for our era is asset inflation and stagnation of the middle and lower stagnation, or catastrophic implosion of the middle and lower middle class. So that is also going to have we're already seeing vintage was a product of this. I'm convinced of this. The rise of vintage in the 2010s was a direct response to the financial crisis. But what is a generation that is becoming poor made vintage cool again? That's not a coincidence. Same thing happens to all those restaurants serving brunch instead of 5-course meals, or suddenly every restaurant, for instance, stopped having tablecloth when it, that sort of family table style dining. All of that stuff came after the Great Recession of 2008, when that type of opulence was out of the question anyway. You're not going to have the plush, large lifestyle that was promised to you. So now you make do, and vintage and brunch were cheaper versions of what happened before. I think that's very clear in hindsight that vintage came not through some sort of sustainability that may have played some role in it, but I'm convinced that is basically the style of downward mobility, which is the culture we still live in for a large amount. So you get opulence at the top, downward mobility for everybody else, and the style you get from that is what we're seeing.
So we're closing in here on 2 hours. So before we go,
I hope they don't bore too many, but yeah.
Certainly didn't bore me. This fascinated me. So before we go, is there anything you wanted to let the viewers know?
No, not in the sense that seek out the things, that that still matter in that sense. The assumption is that the things we love will not be here for that much longer, but while they are here, you should take advantage. Saying so, seek it out, have an intentional approach to how you dress and buy these things. Ensure that it is in the sphere of your continual experience, and not trying to conform to any kind of abstract ideal of how one is supposed to dress. Everything you do should be 1 or 2 steps ahead of where you already are, but with an eye a little bit further down the line. anything else is, yeah. But it's with more things in life. Be more intentional about things. I do think that is happening, or at least there's a desire for it, given the sort of tremendous cultural bottleneck we've been into, or pressure cooker as well, whatever you want to see, we've been on the past couple of years, that we should be more intentional about the things you read, the things you eat, the things you wear, and all of these things. And that is not some sort of obligation from a point of guilt, but from a point of discovery, to anchor your life world in these things that are around you, in the sense that they are meaningful, not in some sort of deep, not even some sort of deep spiritual sense. That is probably not the best idea when it comes to inanimate objects anyway. But to don't waste a good opportunity. Don't seek out the good things while they are still available, because chances are they will be less available tomorrow than they are today.
So for those who don't already follow you, where can they find you?
It's on Instagram. It's H Wilberg with a W, or Why We Remain in the Provinces. There is not that much else out there. I still think if you Google me, the academic career still is on top of the Google search, but maybe for not much longer. There's not much else. Not much else out there, but that is all I have to plug, at least not for now. But I'm not trying to become. It is just bizarre to me that I never expected. Maybe it's a generational thing as well. For me, social media has never been really a medium of the self. I never considered what you put out there as in any way reflective on my real life in any way. It's always bizarre to me when people make demands of you based on what they think you are like. Like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you talking about this? Presuming because you have a minuscule or something of an audience that comes with some kind of responsibility. As an older millennial, the internet bears no responsibility. Internet is anarchy and chaos, and it should have probably been kept that way instead of the sort of monopoly situation it is now. That is also part of the loss that we have experienced, I guess. But it is baffling to me that people do care, but you cannot argue against the law of numbers in that sense. So I guess people do. So I'm always happy. It does, provide me with a real source of joy, but not in this sort of the way people talk about social media, about the instant craving for the attention or something. I think I'm just too old for, I don't know about you, but I'm just too old for any of that. It doesn't really affect me. Someone yells at me on the internet or calls me a homeless person, which does happen with some regularity because of the way something like that. That does happen a lot. I've never been, it's not a question even of thick or thin skin. It's just social media is a joke in that sense. But I mean, there are, it is enjoyable to exchange views and style with people. So I'll keep doing it. And I'm happy that so many people seem to enjoy it. And that's it. I've never tried to me, there's nothing there. Nothing to monetize, nothing to rearrange. I don't think so. It's just an interesting diversion for the stuff I'm really doing, which has very little to do with it. But I think that's the healthiest way to approach things. So if you want to give me a follow, I'm always happy to start a conversation. But hey, that's strange. So in any ways, I take clothing much more seriously than I do social media, I guess. Which is odd because people talk about dressing for the internet a lot and stuff. I don't even understand that mindset really. I don't really know. I'm just too old to know what for the internet sort of means as a actual audience that is meaningful to me in a certain way. It's not, but clothings are. The clothes, people always like withdraw. It's like, okay, don't get upset. Clothing is not that serious. It's just clothes, man. Have fun. Do what you like. Dress what you feel like. Be yourself. All those are terrible ideas. Clothing is deeply serious in that way because it's in the way that they what they articulate about the world and how we move through it. I take that much more seriously than I do social media. But I've kept enough of your attention.